Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Passengers. On paper, this movie should be a big holiday blockbuster movie. You have literally two of the biggest movie stars in the world right now. You have a promising director, according to some, not to me, but according to some. You have a blacklist script, which apparently was supposed to have been really good. And you have probably one of the first original sci-fi films to be made by a major studio in like forever. I can't think of very many. It doesn't happen pretty much ever. But what you get with Passengers is a big, disappointing blockbuster, kind of like what we get with a lot of blockbusters this year, but almost trying to be the big auteur statement of the director Morton Toldum, trying to be kind of Titanic in space, but creepier, and with this whole rape thing, which you probably already know about, the major plot point that's very early on in the film that we didn't know at the trailers and the commercials and everything, but I'm sure at this point you all do know, mixed together in kind of a whole bag of why the fuck did they make this and who the fuck is this for? And that's something that Passengers never really answers, because frankly it's honestly not even that good. Passengers is kind of an interesting case study in the fact that when you look at a film like Gravity or The Martian, those are both films that, to be honest, if you look at the plot or the idea of them, you're like, wow, that does not seem like an audience-friendly, entertaining movie. And both really were, while also being artistic and taking on these greater themes. Passengers is like if those movies sucked, tried to take on greater themes and failed, and what you usually get from Hollywood when they try to attempt these kind of things, and when a director who thinks he's going to be more promising doesn't actually have the ideas to become more promising. You get a movie like Passengers and you watch it kind of fly through the stratosphere, not knowing exactly where it's going and barreling through a ton of ideas and crushing all of them and not really doing a good job with any of it, making you wonder what the fuck were they thinking. Wow, this is like a whole mess of nonsense that turned out to be more of a boring ripoff than anything at all interesting or promising, when it really had all of that going for it going in. On the starship Avalon, which is transporting 5,000 people or colonists to the planet Homestead 2, it's going to take 120 years to get there, and so all these people are in this hypersleep thing, and then 30 years along in the journey, something happens, and Jim Preston, who's played by Chris Pratt, wakes up 90 years too early. He spends a year just hanging out on this luxury ship, chilling with a robot bartender, Arthur, played by Michael Sheen. Oh, a bartender named Arthur. Was that a joke? Oftentimes, you know, the funny thing is if a movie's really bad, I will think, there's no way they did that reference. This movie's too bad to do something like that. So they probably did. That was like my experience with Lone Ranger. So Passengers was real good. Then I'm pulling out the Lone Ranger similarities. So anyway, he hangs out with his robot bartender guy. He gets drunk, and then he notices the beautiful Aurora Lane, who is named after Sleeping Beauty, which is a less creative reference than that Arthur bartender robot thing. It's played by Jennifer Lawrence, and he notices her when he's about to kill himself and decides that she saves him, not because he's so low on human interaction that he will literally kill himself, and that's probably he would have looked at anyone and that would have saved him maybe. But anyway, he falls in love with her and finds out she's a writer and all these things about her, and decides he can figure out a way to wake her up as well, and kind of pretends the ship just woke them up, and what are they gonna do? And then in a scene that's pretty fucking terrible, she finds out that he did wake her up, that he basically ruined her life and just kind of used her as his companion for the rest of his life because he needed something while just stealing her life away. The film kind of forgets about that, so it can do this whole the spaceship's gonna crash and stuff and they need to band together despite the kind of rapey, murdery implications of what he did, and get past all that so that they can save the ship and you can forget about rape like most people do on Christmas and maybe enjoy this movie. Yeah, so this movie's not good. I think it kind of works on both a movie where you're like, what were they thinking, and why are you ripping off of all these other ideas but not doing anything with them? This film is really a failure of postmodernism filmmaking, because often Morton Tildum tries to use ideas from Stanley Kubrick. The bar that the robot's in looks exactly like the Shining bar. Where the crew is looks exactly like something from 2001. So clearly, hey, like most people who make films, he likes Kubrick. That's neat, I guess, but like he did nothing for it other than the style of it. And this film is nice and pretty, I guess, but its style is so empty in that it's just using things because I don't think they could have come up with a better idea than ripping off fairly obvious and pretty iconic ideas. You're not even taking like lesser Kubricks that no one remembers. You're taking two of the big ones in your spaceship movie. Good job there. And even designs from the ships, I was like, oh, that's Star Wars. Oh, that's Star Trek. Oh, that's this, that's that. And certainly some of those things have that and they move past it. But the problem with this film is that there was nothing to make me think about anything else other than what this film really wasn't doing, which was a lot of stuff. Passengers is just such a failure of Hollywood filmmaking. It kind of reminds me kind of how bad 2016 has been for Hollywood. Passengers kind of reminds me of the DC movies. It's like Batman v Superman, but instead you have Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt in it. You think, hey, you have those two in a movie, that's $200 million right there. Unless we make a horrible movie with kind of rapey implications in it that's not very good and boring, then maybe that wouldn't actually, because we'll take all the charisma out of them. There's literally like no charisma between them in this film. There's certain times there are, but there's not enough where I'd say like this really shows the true charisma that you'd expect from the two of them. There was so little for them to even do with these characters, and the dialogue was so bad. In particular, there's two scenes. One where he says he's going to give her more space. She's like, space? That's something I don't need more of. And you're like, because you're in space. Because I get it. But like, holy fuck, are you serious? Like, and then it kind of tests my intelligence or my stupidity, particularly the scene where she finds out that he woke her up, and for a long time in the film he tells the bartender, do not ever tell her that I did this and stuff. And it's like understandable that he wouldn't want her to know that, although probably he shouldn't have done that. He even tells the robot several times, the robot bartender, and then at one point she's like, oh, we have no secrets. And then he looks straight at the bartender robot and goes, yep, no secrets. And doesn't blink, doesn't go like, not the thing, you know. Then the robot's like, oh, so no secret, shit. Well, let me tell you about when he woke you up, which he does. And it was like, how did we get to this point? And that's kind of how the writing goes. They don't really understand what they're doing with certain things. They have ideas that they could play with, and if you had a better filmmaker who really play with the desperation of being on an empty space station for the rest of your life, going to this civilization and all this stuff, you could do interesting things with that. But not in this movie. They just kind of get to that place and shoehorn it in this really terrible, convoluted way that feels like they had the plot points written out in a Hollywood kind of fill in the blank kind of a thing and went, okay, this is how we're gonna do Passengers. Even the part where they go to the big like set piece on the water with the gravity goes in the spaceship and Jennifer Lawrence is in the pool, like that whole part just felt like they're like, we need a set piece here, and they went, okay. And even the big conclusion felt like they walked in at the right moment. It just felt like a dumb, stupid movie that didn't know what it was doing. And even some of the ideas within it, this whole idea of the ship Avalon is going to Homestead 2, and I think it's by the Homestead Corporation, who have colonized space, and basically the idea that, you know, we won't have NASA anymore, sort of like now, and how space will be privatized, which is also like now, that this big corporation has colonized space, and there's Homestead 1 and Homestead 2, and they make trillions of dollars off this sort of thing. It's sort of trying to do the Wall-E thing a little bit, trying to say things about corporations and stuff like that, and it's just a scene, and you're like, why was this in here? Like, you're not saying anything with it. Wall-E said something specifically and obviously about Kmart. Passengers says something about, hey, businesses make money, and you're like, yeah, they do. And they're like, what if businesses had planets that would make money? And you're like, yeah, I guess they would. And that's kind of all there is in Passengers, you know. It even has the same composer, Thomas Newman, who did the score of Wall-E. The problem is this felt like a pale imitation of the score of Wall-E. I actually thought someone else ripped off Thomas Newman in a very lame way, and then at the end I was like, oh, it's Thomas Newman. That's depressing. And Passengers clearly was just mining various things. But like Star Wars did that. Lots of great sci-fi movies have mined different ideas, but you have to do something with them. And Passengers just goes like, this movie did this, let's do it. I think that just emphasized how boring and bad this film was. It's trying to do this thing, they're alone in a spaceship. I've heard the log line for a long time when I heard about the script and development forever. Keanu Reeves was supposed to be the lead, with everyone from Emily Blunt to Reese Witherspoon. All these different directors were also involved, and I think you could do something interesting with this idea, but you have to actually get into the various ideas and know what you're saying with it. And this film has interesting parts, I guess. I think the beginning part when he's by himself is probably the best this movie ever gets, and then kind of gets worse and worse as it goes on because the dialogue was so bad. The characters were just very cookie cutter type of things. There's a part where Jennifer Lawrence's character talks about, like, you get me a cup of coffee and a computer and I look at the Chrysler building, I can write for hours. Like, everything she talked about writing sounded like a robot describing a writer. If you're thinking like maybe there's a theory that she's a robot, you're giving this movie way too much credit, because even if she was, this movie still sucks anyway. This is a very bad, disappointing film. It has everything going for it. It could be something, but I think the problem with this director is that he always goes for like this obvious thing. Like, if you look at The Imitation Game, he did it in a very obvious, bland, kind of laughable soap opera way, because it almost feels like he's clutching to kind of the expected and hoping that will work for him. And I think in Passengers that failed so much worse than it did in The Imitation Game. But I think with this shows he's not really an actor's director, and this is a film you need an actor's director to really do. And the idea to bring kind of a smaller director and make him do a bigger movie is the idea that they could probably do better with the actors and do something more interesting. And in the case of a film like Assassin's Creed, which came out at the same time, that was, you know, a mistake in a beautiful sense. That is awesome and like, wow, how did this happen? Passengers is like the reverse, where you're like, whoa, how did this happen? And he doesn't really work. He's not showing his auteur voice, and he's not really showing much of anything. He's just being what most of these directors who were smaller indie directors who go into these bigger things and have absolutely no personality. It just feels like any other big director, but this feels like any other big director failing and making kind of a bland, bad, big artistic movie statement. Passengers isn't really an enjoyable experience, and it's hard to even remember it, to be honest. It just does not really make a distinct impression on you, because it doesn't make a distinct impression itself. I think the interesting thing is The Martian and Gravity, probably as a log line, if you just 20 years from now, whatever streaming service is there, and you just look at the descriptions, you'd be like, oh, well, Passengers, two of my favorite movie stars in a love triangle in space, how could that not go wrong? And it so does, because this director and the script doesn't understand how to use them at all. It doesn't understand how to use these characters and make them interesting characters, and if you had an interesting, fun character, it could really work. In The Martian, by the way, I don't actually know much about Matt Damon's character, but the movie got it to work. Passengers, I don't know much about them, and that could really actually help this movie, and it doesn't work. Same with, I know little things about Sandra Bullock's character, but it's the thrillingness, and it's so well directed, and it's so audience friendly and enjoyable, you're having fun with it. And Passengers is the reverse of that. Passengers shows you what we really expect from these kind of big sci-fi artistic statements, kind of like Interstellar. But this is worse than Interstellar because it doesn't have weird sci-fi things you can latch onto. I think it wants to act like it does, but all of its sci-fi elements are from other sci-fi movies. The sleeping pod things, like, that's been there before. Nothing in this film is original, and they're not saying anything with it. So it's literally like when people complain films aren't original anymore and they're all based on superhero things. When I see Civil War, that did interesting things with ideas that were in other movies, but Passengers did the same thing and it wasn't interesting. It doesn't matter what your tools are, it matters what you do with them, and Passengers does nothing with any of them. It literally has so much going for it, it's preposterous that this movie failed. It's like a DC movie. You have Batman and Superman in a movie. How did you fuck that up? And Passengers is the same way. It's worse than Batman and Superman because that's a movie for dumb people that make big excuses for why it could work. Passengers isn't even that good. It's just a huge mistake on, like, who would even enjoy this? Like, that's what I was thinking while watching your movie. This is why people think Hollywood is clueless, because they thought that this could work. I wonder if there was so much money in this in development, they felt they like sort of had to make this, or they just threw $30 million down the toilet. It seems like they threw more down the toilet by actually making it, because this was just a futile experience. As an audience member, I can't imagine what they thought while they were making this turd. It just kind of lies there like a fish and expects you to be entertained by it. It's creepy, it's off-putting, and it's boring. You're just an unlikely passenger strapped along watching this tediously bad Hollywood film and wondering what the fuck were they thinking, and they don't really have an answer because they have no concrete ideas within it. Passengers is a big Hollywood mistake to cap off a year with a lot of big Hollywood mistakes, and I guess it's fitting that this is how we end this year, with probably a lot of promise that didn't really go anywhere, and unfortunately we're sitting around watching this crap. So if you have seen Passengers and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.